Welcome to another edition of Beyond the Halo, Real Talk with Women in Ministry. I'm Pastor Kathleen Panning, also sometimes known as the Tilted Halo. And my guest this morning is the Reverend Bishop Virginia or Jenny Aebischer. She is Bishop of the South Carolina Synod of the ELCA, having served in that position since 2020. And prior to that, she served as assistant to the bishop here in South Carolina from 2008 to 2020. She was ordained as a pastor in the ELCA in 1989, has served as pastor of two congregations in South Carolina. And prior to her ordination, she worked as a youth director. She has done clinical pastoral education and served in two congregations as a pastoral assistant. She received her Master of Divinity degree from Luther Theological Southern Seminary in 1989 and a BA from Uppsala College in 1983. Bishop Jenny is married to the Reverend Paul Aebischer, who serves as a pastor in South Carolina in a congregation, and together they have two grown sons. So, Bishop Jenny, as I affectionately know you and hope that's okay for our conversation, welcome to this little set of interviews called Beyond the Halo.
Well, thank you. Good to be with you, Pastor. Yeah, it's quite a surprise, actually. I'm not used to being interviewed.
Well, this is a conversation. So, and it's being done as a way of somewhat introducing people to women in ministry and some of the issues that we have faced along the journey, and also as a way of kind of letting people know that I have a book coming out sometime next year, hopefully early in the year, called Tilted Halo, exposing the truth of women in ministry and untold stories about that. So this is kind of a way of letting people know ahead of time, just a few little drops of stories along the way. Okay. And what I'd like to have you share a little bit about is, well, first of all, a question. You became bishop in 2020. Are you the first female bishop in the ELCA in the South?
So not technically. The southeastern region of the ELCA is called Region 9, and that includes the Caribbean Synod, where there have been female bishops prior to my election. But in terms of the rest of the region in the southeast, I'm the first female bishop elected. Yes.
Yeah. So being the first in anything creates some issues. Yeah. And one of them is, kind of, how do I do this? Where am I going? Kind of finding the roadmap. Now, you had the advantage of being assistant to the bishop prior to your election, so you knew some of what's going on. Yeah. But it's a little different when you actually have that title. Yeah. Can you share a little bit of that story with us?
Yeah. I think it was surprising. Well, first of all, I was elected in the heat of the pandemic. And that in and of itself was an interesting time, right? Like, just everything had pivoted, everything was different. And even the way we did election, I was the second bishop in the ELCA elected in an online assembly. Just learning how to do that was all new for us. So the thing that happened initially for me was kind of a tie-over from when I was assistant to the bishop. There was great concern for our pastors, our deacons, and our congregations, and what was happening to them in the midst of the pandemic. And so the early days of my tenure as bishop, I spent basically doing this. I was meeting by Zoom every single day for months to try to connect with my pastors and deacons and council presidents to see what was happening in our various communities, and to pray with them, and also to offer a word of support and encouragement. I think that was a really good way start this position, because it gave me an opportunity to hear, because we were in the midst of what I would consider an emergency. It gave me the opportunity to hear firsthand, in probably record time using technology, from most of our leaders. Between September, when I started officially on September 1st, and about December 15th, we've done about 127 of those visits.
Wow.
So there were a lot of conversations, and I thought they were really helpful and healthy, and a good way to start, if you can believe that, in the midst of a pandemic. The other thing that's true is that there was quite a bit of work going on at that time, and so tying up the weekends from the position of assistant to the bishop and assembly manager and all of the other hats that you wear when you're an assistant, and trying to then take on the bishop's position was a pretty steep learning curve, even though I had been in the office for 12 years prior to serving. There are some, as you said, there are some differences to actually wearing the title from sitting in the sideline and watching that happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What you describe as coming into that position in the middle of a pandemic, which none of us had any experience with, dealing with, and shifting a lot of things to online for pastors and everything else, reminds me a little bit of when I started in ministry. And it was in February, so that meant Lent was knocking right on my door. And I started with funerals. And in the first 5.5 months, had 14 funerals. So like almost one every single week. And the first one was before I even conducted a worship service at that congregation, or two congregations. And trying to find the home of these people. It was a rural congregation, and the person who called me to tell me about this was trying to give me directions and said, well, you go out this road out of town and then you turn where the Peterson barn used to be. And I knew I was in trouble.
Yeah, I've had those directions too.
Right. So it's, I mean, we get those kinds of things. And for you, it's kind of like, I'm picking up pieces here of how ministry used to be. And none of us had any directions for a pandemic.
That's right.
You stepping into the new role as well as a bishop, that for anybody that would have been challenging. And then being a female on top of that, and the questions that many people have about, should women really be doing this? Can we really trust women in ministry? Okay. So how has that journey been since that time?
Yeah. It has been a new learning experience every day. So as you shared with your listeners, I was ordained in 1989. That was 19 years after the church was ordaining women, after our church was ordaining women. But it was still a very new thing in South Carolina. And so I learned from the very beginning that there were people who had apprehension about women in ministry. I'm not sure if we could actually do the job or do it well. And some that were willing to give pushback, right? So you learn early how to navigate those waters. And the result of that and the years of ministry have taught me that it's just part of who I am. It's part of what I experience. And so I try not to allow that to just hold me back or stop me or cause me to digress from the vision and the mission that's in front of me. I tried to listen to people with open ears and open heart and try to recognize where they're coming from, and then see if we can get everybody moving forward on board with what's happening. And of course that was true in the pandemic. I was thinking I know you didn't ask this question, but I've been reflecting a lot. You get to this stage of life and you start reflecting a lot on your ministry and on your life, right? I think. And so I was ordained in Charleston, South Carolina, and started my call there 4 days before Hurricane Hugo ripped through the state and brought a lot of destruction.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it turned out that Lutheran Disaster Response and the ELCA was very responsive, still are, but they were particularly responsive. I was a very young pastor. I had some experience in that area because I had interned in Charleston. And so when the ELCA came in, they asked me to be the director of site coordination and volunteer coordination for hurricane recovery.
Wow.
So in addition to being a new pastor, newly ordained pastor, who was active in the congregation mainly on Sundays, I spent most of my first year moving around the Tri-County area in disaster recovery. And I reflect on that from time to time. Of course, the anniversary every September reminds me of that time. But when I went through the pandemic and then in this new call, it kind of was like deja vu in some respects, a different kind of
Right.
disaster, but still
Right.
a disaster, right?
Right.
And one of the things that, or a couple of things that I learned in disaster ministry is that, first of all, uh, you have to look for the signs of hope and new life, and you also have to walk with people who are grieving and struggling. And in the midst of that, I think we find some of the deepest representation of Christ in community.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a strength that comes that surrounds you when you're in disaster, right? Like
Yeah.
people, it's like you get down to the basics of what really
Yeah.
being a Christ follower is. What we're here to be, walking in Jesus' way and helping each other and loving one another, and you see that in a beautiful way as a result of disasters.
Yeah.
At least I have. And then I think what has happened since, to get back to your question, is that for some, life goes back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start to see some of the challenges brought forth that are less at the heart of the basics of being Christian or trying to live in Christ's way. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have to sort through and recognize that the church is made up of human beings, right?
Yeah.
And
Good, bad, and indifferent. We are
yeah,
human.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So I don't know if I answered your question, but what I have learned in my ministry is that there's something good that can come from crisis, and um, if you look carefully, you will see the face of Jesus in the midst of it, and the hands and the heart and the feet of his disciples, and that usually inspires people to keep moving forward in mission with the capacity to which they're able to do. So I've all of that has, I think, set me up for being able to recognize where there's opportunity to move forward and where there's a need to step back and listen more and wait, um,
Mm,
you know, and see what's going to happen next.
yeah.
I don't
Um,
know if that makes sense, but
well, that time of listening and stepping back, it can be tough because we don't always like what we hear, and
yeah,
it's can be difficult things that we hear. But what you say about times of crises or disaster, those 14 funerals at the beginning of my ministry got me very well exposed to the whole community because I was the very first woman pastor within like a 60 to 90-mile radius of any denomination, because that was back in 1980. So even a few years before you were ordained. And
yeah,
it showed people that no, the roof doesn't fall in and God doesn't zap the congregation or people. And the message, the wrappings may be different, but the message is the same. And the package it comes in looks and sounds a little different, but the message is still there, and it's God's love and grace that's there.
yeah.
And so, yeah, it's tough to walk that road, when we have to walk through the disaster. But yes, there can be real ministry there and really God's grace. And God can use those times, not that God causes them, but God can definitely use those times to advance God's love and grace in the world. So, all of these things, and yes, men can do the same thing, but as women, we bring um, our own experiences, kind of sometimes that mothering instinct into the midst of it as well. So it's a slightly different take on things, and for people to hear that and receive that. So nowadays, I mean, the world's in a different place than it's ever been before. That's always true, and the challenges are still there for sharing the message. And there are fewer people frequently attending worship than there used to be. So the challenges are different. How do you see? Um, is there anything you see in ministry these days that can be more helpful to women and men in ministry to facing that? Is there anything you have come across or seen or experienced?
You broke up for me a little bit, Pastor. Can you say that question again?
Well, because the world has changed and people aren't as prone to regular worship, and more people are leaving church membership, is there anything that you have seen or experienced or um, thought of that might be more helpful to those in ministry in these kinds of times?
Well, I don't know how helpful, but um, my colleague bishops and I talked several times recently about how important it is for us uh, as a church to be able to go deep in our faith, right? That um, maybe the numbers of people aren't there, and that can certainly be discouraging or distracting. But our job isn't necessarily about numbers, but rather about depth of faith and helping people from earliest, youngest to oldest to continue to be open and grow in God's word and in God's grace and God's love. And we have that opportunity regardless of how many people are showing up. So
Mhm.
I think that there's some advantages to really being able to focus on drilling deeper in faith,
Right.
spending time uh, in the Word and
Mm.
learning some of the things that perhaps we learned in seminary. Maybe we need to learn again, looking at biblical scholarship and trying to understand what it is that God is still teaching us, because we know that God is always with us and always teaching us, right? That our faith teaches us that. And so we hold on to that. So if we're sincere about wanting to follow the way of Jesus, we're always open to learning more,
Mm.
particularly in our tradition, right? We
Right.
don't have this like, oh, this is, you've achieved whatever knowledge you need to achieve, and therefore you have nothing else to do. No, we're
Oh,
constant.
oh.
Yeah, we're lifelong learners, or at least we profess to be. So I think the word of hope is the opportunity for us to really go deeper in discipleship and deeper in our understanding and our openness to learning more. And I hope that it is a word of hope for us to be able to focus and keep our focus on Jesus,
Mhm.
and not necessarily get caught up. I know it's so easy to get caught up in all of the discourse in the world,
Right.
and to get depressed by it and get down by it. But when we look at Christ, we have an example of
Mhm.
living a happier, healthier life, and a life that lives that love. And I don't mean that love in terms of a cheap or warm, fuzzy love. I mean a deep, an abiding love that walks through all kinds of situations with one another, and knowing that God is in the midst of us. So I think that that's the hope for today, for our time in history right now, is to recognize that some people are going to use the word or the church in a superficial way. But we have the opportunity as followers of Christ to continue our growth and to go deeper in our faith. And I think that my roster, my pastors, my deacons, they are doing their level best to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ in the pulpit and in through their lives and their Bible studies. And so I'm very proud of them for that. Some people, they think good news means that everything is hunky-dory, that's an old phrase, but you know what I mean? Like everything's roses and sunshine, or daisies and sunshine, whatever that phrase is. But good news is God with us in all things. And I think when we can begin to recognize that we become the heart, the face, the hands, the feet of Christ in the world, what an amazing and humbling opportunity we have.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find that even after 40 plus years of preaching, there's still stuff that's down in the text that are those juicy, wonderful tidbits that change a perspective and add to things. So to me, that's the joy of reading through and studying and sharing scripture. And, the whole idea of walking with Christ and knowing that Christ brings in all people and is there for everyone, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, non-believer, whatever, that there is a word for everyone, and it's not exclusive, but inclusive.
Yes.
And that's something that the world really desperately needs in this typically very divisive time as well. It's a word of hope and love and grace in the midst of that. So I want to thank you, Bishop Jenny, for your time and being willing to share this and some of your journey as a woman in the midst of ministry as well. And just to let people know that they can contact you through the South Carolina Synod of the ELCA if they have a desire to do that. And for people to know also that tomorrow there'll be another edition of this little series called Beyond the Halo. So thank you so much, Bishop, and blessings to you and to all of the South Carolina Synod for and the staff at the Synod office for this Easter, Thanksgiving time, and this season, and then Advent coming right after that. So
absolutely. Thank you so much, Pastor Kathleen. It's good to talk with you, and I'm very grateful for your ministry and also for you introducing me to this program. I hope it's been helpful for those who are listening.
I hope so too. So peace and blessings to everyone, and until tomorrow.
God bless you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.